I would like to invite Mr. Stang from the Commission to say, then we discuss a bit the USO scope, and we have also, you know, a number of questions. Then if we agree that we have to have USO and USPs, then we still have a lot of questions. Can you please help us to move slightly to the second session? And what is the current view and situation from your perspective?
All right, thank you and good afternoon, everybody. As a matter of fact, I will be probably covering both sessions or making a bridge between the two. First of all, it's great to have you here. It's a good sign and a bad sign that you all came to Bucharest. The good sign is that shows that you are interested in this debate and willing to contribute. The bad sign is that this shows that there are many divergent interests at stake that need to be reconciled one way or the other, and that is our job in the European Commission. Now, I have no final answers to any of the questions that you have in your screen, Jack. And I don't need to have them right now, but we will need them next year or the year after. Just a brief outlook of where we are going. Next year, 2015, we're going to issue some documents, if you want. Yeah, there will be a stock-taking exercise in terms of reporting, the implementation report for the Postal Service Directive, a progress report on the parcel roadmap, which is closely linked. So that's a stock-taking, what are the issues, the challenges, the problems, but then of course also looking forward, what if anything needs to be done to adapt our legal framework to this new world of which we have heard lots of things today already. So that's what's coming up. Of course, we're not starting from scratch either. There have been lots of conferences, meetings, studies. You've all already heard about this VIC study of 2013, the main developments, also the main findings in terms of USO being provided properly, operators having become more profitable, more efficient, quality of service actually being good. They also refer to some problems in terms of transposition, in terms of some competition concerns, licensing requirements, VAT exemption, terminal dues, to name but a few. And then, of course, they turn very much to the USO as well in questioning the sustainability of the USO in the future if it were to stay unchanged. And that's the topic of today. Now, looking forward in policy making, the same tensions that had already been there when the first three directives was drafted still exist and partially have been accentuated even further. One is, of course, this eternal tension between competition and USO. Another tension lies in the fact that there are so many different interests at stake. Let's start with the users, because the user needs should be in the center of all of this. We're talking about an industry that provides services to the economy, to business, to citizens. So it is that user need that should be at the center of all our discussions. Those users are business citizens. They use letters, parcels, or electronic services. But then, of course, the specific dimensions that we already discussed in this first session, one is the inclusion debate. We had several dimensions of that: geography, demography, illiteracy, access to e-solutions in the first place, and so on. And the other very important dimension, and we had trade unions speak already, is of course the employment dimension, sector still being a very important employer, even after all these restructurings that have gone on in the last 10 to 15 years. Also, the VIC study referred to issues, to changes in the types of jobs, quality of jobs, and so on and so forth. But VIC also, by the way, clearly stressed that a lot of this was due to the changing environment, to changing markets, and not so much due to the liberalization process, because competition in letter markets is not very significant in many member states. Now, in the future, of course, all these changes in the environment are going to accelerate even further. Just a matter of speed, probably different speeds across Europe, but still, citizens will become more online still than they are today, not less online. There are ever more digital natives out there, and so on and so forth. Companies will increasingly turn to e-solutions if the costs are much lower than sending letters. Governments, we heard Copenhagen Economics and others speak about that. If e-government is being pursued further, and it will be pursued further, that's also going to continue and to further accelerate. But on the good side, of course, e-commerce is also bound to growth. So all of this is going to be even more pronounced in the future than it was already in the past. Now, this brings me then to the purpose of the USO. You could also start with a thought experiment. What if we hadn't had a USO so far? if it all had been liberalized always, but now we saw that the market has not managed to address all needs out there, how would we define a USO? What would be the scope? Whom would we cover? Who should provide that service and so on? I mean, it's an interesting thought experiment because we're always used to extrapolating from the past and trying, of course we can't do other than that, but trying to adapt our historically grown structures and frameworks to this future. But still, it's an interesting thought experiment. 3 questions on this. First, who needs it? That's still linked to session 1. Second, who should define those needs and the frameworks addressing those? And third, who should finance the whole thing? Now, who needs it? As a starting point, I would argue that this is anyone whose needs, whether it's on letters or parcels, would not be adequately served by the market without any USO. We discussed rural and disadvantaged and so on and so forth. That should be the starting point. It's about market failure, and many economists would agree, and that came out of Vic, came out of Copenhagen, that where competition takes place, excessive regulation is very seldom a good thing on many sectors across the board, because it distorts competition, and VAT or cross-subsidization are examples of that. So a priori, that would call, if we were to define the USO from scratch, would call for a rather narrow scope of services. Second, who would then define those needs? Well, given that there is so much divergence across member states, so many different speeds, we may have to reconsider this balance between what is done in Brussels, what is done in member states. And that will be a difficult balance to strike. And again, I have no answers to that. I'm just more raising questions to you. On the EU side, probably we will always need very clear principles, very clear common rules that have to be applied across the board. We should probably always be very clear on the scope of the USO in terms of what services should actually be covered, single Ps or other services, because those very different definitions of the scope of the USO across member states is also one problem in terms of competition, in terms of cross-border trade, and so on and so forth. This services scope, we could either define a minimum scope, as had been the case in the past. We could also define, in theory, a maximum scope. We could say, based on our joint analysis and public consultations and so on and so forth, that is the type of service that needs to be assured to citizens, and the rest can be left to markets. We would always focus on cross-border, by definition, on the single market, terminal dues and issues like that. Member states would actually be much better placed to assess the local needs, the real local needs. So member states probably should be given more leeway when it comes to some of the dimensions of the USO, in terms of coverage, in terms of geography, in terms of frequency, quality, whatever. I mean, as I said, the boundaries yet have to be clarified, but it could make sense in any new directive, if we come to that point, to discuss this issue of subsidiarity in the light of divergent user needs much more thoroughly than in the past. Last but not least, who would then finance any USO? We had this idea of the compensation fund, so operators, competitors, if any, to contribute to that fund. So far, it has not been greatly successful as a financing tool. So if that idea was to be kept, it would have to be refined, improved. Users paying for the service and for the universal service, there are certain limits, of course, in terms of raising prices out there that would even accelerate e-substitution. So if a letter costs much more than in the past, even citizens would even more turn to electronic means of communications. Big mailers would certainly do that. I mean, if we were to increase the price for big mailers, they're gone. Which leaves us with the taxpayer. We're not here in this room, by the way. We're all taxpayers, but there's no one representing taxpayers here. As taxpayers, all of us collectively have to decide what the most important use is of scarce public funds. I mean, we have budgetary problems all over Europe, and if there's any decision on what is more important for us, is it to invest in research, in education, in universal service of whatever kind, there are trade-offs to be made, but the taxpayer is a very important consideration here as well. That links also a bit to the willingness to pay discussion. I think Copenhagen said it as well. When we do further research on this, and I think we should all get a much better understanding of those user needs and what they are today, what they will be tomorrow, then it's very, very important how you phrase those questions. If you're asking questions like, well, if the price of a letter went up from 65 cents to €1, given that the overall part of spending in disposable income is very low, lower than ice cream, probably people would be willing to pay more for a letter that they don't send anyway. If you ask them, are you willing to pay 30 euros more in taxes per month, probably the answer would be different. So in all of that research, we must be very careful in terms of how we phrase research questions. Now, from the Commission's point of view, as I said at the outset, our role is to reconcile those different societal interests. In the break, I briefly talked to one of the trade unionists who said he's one of the good guys. He said this in laughing, yeah, which sort of suggested I'm one of the bad guys. I think we, in the Commission, we're neither the good nor the bad guys. We are here to maximize benefits for the society, which is users and citizens, which is operators, which is workers, employees amongst these operators. Normally, I'm not a strong believer in win-win-win scenarios because it's always bullshitting to some extent. Yeah, you can't do it just 2 minutes. You can't do it right for everybody. There's always going to be winners and losers. But as a starting point, more as a vision, if you want, if operators, and coming back to flexibility now, if economic operators are given the flexibility to focus their resources in a way that maximizes consumer customers' benefits, then not only will those operators be more profitable, be allowed to be more profitable, they would probably also have more happy customers, and as such, they would also be able to stay a very important employer out there. So that is a bit the grand direction I am aiming at. Of course, this may not always be possible, but then we need very well thought through and very well targeted measures to make sure that where we can't get close to this win-win situation, we find appropriate fallback solutions. That is basically all I wanted to say right here. We need all your views, not just today, but also in the year to come. We will most probably launch a very broad public consultation on all of this in spring or a bit later next year. And I count on all of you from all sides to actively contribute to this. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Then, should we agree about, of course, universal services, we need to designate someone? Do we need to designate someone? I would like to invite Mr. Visco Comandini from the University of Rome, Tor Vergata, to provide us a view on the situation. Then, I will be happy, of course, and I invite everybody already to think how we will designate USP providers. What we see if we investigate everywhere is that there are different ways to do it. We see that it might be, of course, a number of financing directly from the public sector, from the users. There are different ways, and we need to investigate a bit further. Mr. Visco Comandini.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I will use this floor for trying to be provocative and try to add some food for thought in this moment that we lack of sound basic principle in order to redefine the USO and to make it, to match it with competition and financial sustainability of the universal service provider. So this proposal is only drawn in framework, on general framework. It requires to be adapted a lot of different implications that I will not discuss to make it easier. This proposal has not as discussed, but none of the stakeholders does not reflect. It only reflects my position on the issue. So this presentation is mainly focused on products and obligation in delivery, which is the main component of USO. Just let, for sake of simplicity, leave out the post office network density and this kind of things, or frequency, which is, in my opinion, a second level point of view. Declining volumes, there's a need to reshape the USO in order to ensuring sustainability of the national basic nationwide distribution and clearance of postal items. The true risk is that if we allow to disconnect some areas, the whole system may easily and quickly collapse. The present USO definition reflects a basic conflict, which is, in my opinion, a sort of original sin of the regulation in Europe, which is to define USO in terms of products, as it were voice versus data like in electronic communication. But this is not the case. This is a wrong approach, since it's not the product, USO product per se, which is a true obligation. The obligation is something more general. So we have to, the obligation is comprised to deliver de facto all items non-express. I mean, I'm referring to mail for sake of simplicity, in loss-making areas. We have to redefine in terms on specific focus on individual consumers' protection, strengthening the rights to freely receive mail, non-express mail, and to send it as individual consumer. I think it's interest of the whole industry to not allow this disconnection, because there are significant network externalities that flow in the network. If a part of the network is disconnected, the whole system may easily collapse, as we see in some developing country where the postal service has never been implemented at a national level, and they will never start. The industry is strongly affected by this. The proposal intended to solve the main point, how to ensure a long-run postal service provision in areas where delivery is uneconomic, and this area with uneconomic delivery is going to grow and to become bigger and bigger in next year as far as volume declines. So the proposal is to define an asymmetric USO framework that includes in clearance only single piece, mail and parcel. What really matters is the way of inserting mail and parcel into the system. If inserted at post office or in letter box as individual, that's USO. If not, all other bulk mail, bulk parcel, no, is out of the universal service. However, is asymmetric, because to the other side of the value chain you have delivery. All mail and parcel, I mean, for sake of simplicity, consider mail, excluding, of course, express mail, delivered in specific areas. Just for sake of simplicity, consider a single postcode or group of postcode, depending on how the regulation works in each country, where either the universal service provider is the only provider in that area, i.e. delivery is not contestable, or being competition absent in countries where you don't have competition in delivery, the universal service provider face significant losses in delivery because of insufficient volume delivered. This approach has been operationally implemented in a consultancy that we had with NIRA for Postal Slovenia some years ago. And we measured the USO net cost by using this approach. To ascertain whether delivery in a specific area or postcode should be subject to USO or not, just observe how the market works. Or, in case of no competition in delivery, look into specific data of the area provided by the universal service provider. If a competitor or more competitor provide services in a given postcode, this is a strong evidence that this postcode is contestable. Therefore, the USP, the universal service provider, can profitably deliver it as well. Because if the competitors can do it in a profit way, why should not? Therefore, this in delivery, this postcode should be dropped from a USO obligation. And therefore from USO net cost calculation. If in a given country where competition does not exist, the universal service provider should provide data, detailed data on volumes delivered. And if this calculation shows significant losses, it should be included in USO, regardless of the product. It doesn't matter the products, because it's not the product, it's the obligation to deliver the key point which should be protected. Contestable and non-contestable postcode database requires to be updated by the regulator on a yearly basis. It's a hard work for the regulator to do that, but it is feasible. The universal service provider should provide the regulator data on volumes delivered by postcode. Each postcode has its own delivery balance sheet that shows whether it should be financed or not. However, the regulator has an additional task to perform, which is to carefully monitor efficiency in delivery. And this is something that maybe the universal service provider industry should learn from competitors. Because as far as I know, there are fixed delivery routes. Each delivery route has assigned a specific postman, and like dog, they perform always the same route. But as volumes are dropped, there's a need to reshape it in a continuous way. Express courier are doing continuously. Competitor and mail cannot be continuous. However, it should be flexible. Just let's consider, for instance, south of Italy. South of Italy has 40 pieces per person. And with 40 pieces per person, you need to reshape everything. Implication. Non-contestable area become the regulated part of the postal delivery network, while contestable area is the competitive part. Non-contestable area, fully regulated price should be set. Therefore, the volumes delivered should be VAT exempted. And this is something which already happens in Italy. A full playing field is then guaranteed since market access in both areas is the same for all market players, to allow to clearly separate the effect of the true USO net burden from the increasing network unsaturation. This is an important point. We have to separate the two effects. USO does not mean unsaturation. And unsaturation will become in the coming year more and more and more larger. And we have to find a solution. This is a solution that maybe works. USO net costs are substantially dropped. However, compensation fund could be one of the possible tools for implementing the system. I just say that, and this is the conclusion, first of all, the regulators are strongly asked and required to perform the study on substitutability of products, of competitive products with USO products. Without this study, all decisions concerning compensation funds and all issues concerning competition are practically illegitimate. if enforced, there's another point which has to be taken seriously into account. Even if enforced, the compensation fund should be fair. A tax levied on competitor that does not satisfy the proportionality criterion will affect either competitor profitability or market entry. So in some countries in Europe, we have an experience that a too high tax on entrance will prevent the market to enter. So in this case, just be careful in this use. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Mr. Visco Comendini, I was watching from the back of the room and I see, I see a few emotions left and right. And hopefully we will get some reactions after I will give the floor. But before we move to post-Europe, getting some ideas about designation, I would like to ask Mr. Mierla, I hope I say it correctly, before we say how do we designate USP and so on, what are the consumer, are you ready from a consumer perspective to pay more to get those services? Are you ready to accept, some other obligations or, change in behaviors? What are the feeling you have from a consumer point of view when we have to discuss about all those financial issues?
Thank you so much. But in the point of view, I think it's very important, don't discussion about consumers can be somebody for another room. The consumers in this room, it is everybody, we are consumers. You, me, everybody. And for this, it's very important to understand, because we are consumers, what is better for us. And for this, for example, I think it's very easy to make a short exercise and don't necessarily to answer, but when it's the last time when you are sent for, I don't know, a postcard or something, and many times maybe we don't have trust from the glue from the stamps. For example, now in Romania and in Southeast Europe, the consumers protection movement, we are making a comparative test and we are go to the laboratory to make some analysis from the glue from the stamps, from the envelope, what type of the color we use is friendly, is safety for health for the consumers. Because many times we don't think about this. It's something it's normal, but many times we can find something is not so normal. And for this, I think, is the moment from 2015, 2020 in European Union. And maybe why not in the whole world to make something for have to more confidence in the product and the service for the consumers, for us. Because in this moment, in Romanian, but not only in Romanian, many times we are going in the shop and we want to buy, I don't know, something, and we not have so confident it's a real, this product. Maybe they have horse meat inside, and for the label it's only to beef, or something this. But for this, the confident are coming from more education, more transparent, more information, and not in the last, I think the right and the obligation for the consumers is very important to give for them, because it's not important. I don't think somebody are say, okay, the consumers is prepared to pay more for some services. No, this is the problem. The problem is the consumers are understand why they must pay more. They are pay something more, the service is better, the services is necessary. And for this, I think this type of the question must have for everybody. And for example, in Southeast Europe and in Romania, we have a real problem because the post services, we have a good competition, for example, in Romania. We have a lot of company, they are make something, but we are sure they are respects the rule. The consumers, they are know his right. They are know how can make a complaint, where they can make a complaint. And for this, for example, 2 years ago, we start a big campaign in Romanian for the consumers. They understand their rights. The name of the campaign is, you know who I am a European citizen and I have right. But for this, for example, in the Postal Services, I think in many countries, this type of the spam postal, it's a real problem because, for example, in Romanian, many invoice, the Romanian consumers, they can pay the invoice because they don't find in the post office, because they are having the post office full of the, I don't know, some advertising or something, and then they have a real problem. And for this, I think, is the moment to discussion about the rights, the obligation, and the education for the consumers, and what is very important for the next generation. Because, for example, my daughter, I talking yesterday with she, and I say, 20 years ago, I don't have internet. When I'm in school, it's very hard for me to have some information. And she say, okay, I understand you don't have a mobile phone, but you have a computer. It's impossible to don't have internet. You have internet somewhere. She can understand 20 years ago the internet, it's not realistic. And for this, the future consumers, I think, it's very important to have a good strategy for education, for information, and not in the all, to understand how they can communicate in the same country or in the different country. And in the second part, what I think is very important, the consumers to have confidence. And for example, I am a consumer to send the postcard all the times, the Christmas times, when some friends or some family, I like the idea to write my hand to send a postcard. But for another hand, in the different country, for example, I don't find the stamps all the time. They have autocollant, you know, you can, and I must make what I make 10 years ago. I must put some water or my tank from the stamps. I'm sure it's okay. This type of the glue, there respects all the regulation. It's safe for me. The printing from the envelope, it's safe for me. This type of the question we want to answer from this, and maybe it's another type of view for you. And for the finish of my discussion, for my intervention, I want, when you are make the regulation, when we are thinking about the consumers, don't thinking the consumer is somebody in front of you or somebody from the street. You are the consumers. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And maybe it's providing some ideas about generating demand and so on. But Mr. Forceville, let's go to the core discussion. Then we have a USO. It might change from time to time. Then how do we designate it? What will be the mechanism we have to define? What do you believe are the competitive or competition impacts? Can you help us? What's your view on that?
Well, here, first, thanks for this consultation. We love ERGP consultation as Post Europe. We love their time frame, especially this time. Sometimes we like it a little less when it is during summertime or between Christmas and New Year. But it's the last time I say it, I swear. So, but please be aware that 6 weeks during these tough periods are sometimes challenging for giving you a good answer to your consultation. But here it was a great time and we had plenty of time to answer. I was there primarily to tell you that we have a common position on your consultation. And 30 countries out of 31, 30 operators out of 31, except Royal Mail, who couldn't join this time. But so there is a good common understanding on your consultation and on the answer to make to this consultation. And the problem is this paper doesn't really answer the question you are asking me at the moment. But Nevertheless, I will try first to tell you that this paper is, of course, available everywhere on our website, and you received our answer. And following to what has been said this morning, of course, and in a way, no surprise, following what we've heard earlier today, we are pretty much in favor of flexibility in the framework of the current regulation. And we also are in favor of having a little more subsidiarity because the situation is really different from one country to another. So that said, your question is how to designate an operator?
Yes. We are all listening.
Well, this is not a choice of the operators, is it? I think that there is also a principle of reality now in the market in Europe. Tender or not tender, that is probably the question. If you organize a tender, you have to be sure that people will run for that. And it also depends, to have the answer to this question, it depends, of course, on the obligations linked to it and to the price the state is ready to pay for these obligations. And of course, I do not see people running for losing money. So once more, tender, why not? But you have to find people interested in making the service. Then, I don't know if it answers your question.
Okay, but just moving to the second one then. Let's say tender or not, it should be profitable. How do you see the financing mechanism?
The what?
The financing mechanism.
Well, the financing mechanism here, we all know, earlier this afternoon, we've heard about pay or play. It doesn't work anywhere. We have heard about compensation fund. Does it work somewhere? And are there operators, enough operators to put money in the compensation fund? Or is it the universal service provider that are the only one to pay for the compensation fund because of their market share? So the only other way to finance the universal service would be the state budget. I do not see it happen for obvious reasons. So obviously, and back to our paper, we have to adapt the universal service obligations.
Thank you. We will come back. Mr. Badescu, what's your reactions about what you heard? I still need to know how we will finance and designate the operators. Tell us if you might have another idea about that.
First of all, thank you very much for this opportunity. I'm Octavian Badescu. I'm Vice President of Romanian Courier Operator Association. And I'm shareholder of a company which is within this industry, is acting in the industry. From this perspective, and trying to limit to the 5 minutes time frame, I refer specifically to the second session questions. First, It was about does the current scope of the USO lead to excessive cost? From our point of view, I think we should first define the terms, meaning what do we understand by excessive cost? Anyway, if we redefine, meaning reducing the scope of the universal service, even those which believe that the costs are excessive will have their interest fulfilled. Therefore, we'll have to take the necessary steps to reduce the scope, on one hand, in order to decrease the cost. So yes, we have to reduce the scope, and we also have to implement slower delivery time frames, slower class of services as Australia did, as I see in the discussion paper. Another way of reducing cost is by so-called community mailbox delivery, as Canada did, and also to eliminate legal requirements related density of postal offices or related frequency of the deliveries. We have to do all these things because when cost may become excessive, after all, when there is less demand for some services, which is leading to low volumes and as a result to high cost. Therefore, we should take note of the lacking of the demand. And as a result, the offer will have to be more limited. However, it is important that this lack of the demand, it is not primarily caused by the economic downturns or cycles, but by technology and by behavioral changes. It is practically a market reality. The question in this case may become, what it is still indispensable and cannot be replaced with more economical alternatives, and in the same time cannot be offered at an affordable price provided by a player in a profitable manner. It's long, but this is how we should redefine it. Because the answer might be nothing to this question. Therefore, and coming to the second question about tariff regulation, a tariff regulation will affect competition, and we should avoid it, because when the competition is affected, the result will be a cost increase, which we have to avoid it, no matter who will decide to support it. Third, fourth, and fifth question together. As we see it, we need to protect a free competition, also within the US Universal Service Area, and we do not see the need to designate in one way or another a specific universal service provider. For the last question, we believe that any form of subsidizing or creating a compensation fund, it is rather dangerous. It is not in the interest of the free market competition, of the business environment, and finally, even in the interest of the consumers. And this mainly because it is very tricky to determine which services for which provider produce losses and the real reason for those losses. I mean, if it's wrong management or it is low selling price, imposed selling price. So if there is a loss, the most fair way to cover it, it's by financial contribution of the consumer who use it. Thank you.
Don't leave the flow because, you know, maybe, of course, all people in the room are not, but I'm a bit slow. then I understood from the first session that we reduce and so on the scope. Okay, I understand that. And then we moved to a number of services to be provided, and we heard from consumers and so on that, of course, we might have, you know, a discussion around inclusion, about geographical reach, rural environment, and so on. And you told, correct me if I'm wrong, that we don't need to designate a USO provider. Does it mean that
Anybody.
Are you confident that everybody and the market will play, that I'm in the middle of nowhere, I will get everything?
If we decrease the scope, decrease the frequency, decrease the legal frame of reaching next day, let's say, or very frequently all the areas, so if we lower these demands, then the competition, it will be more open. And the reason why I'm let's say, in favor of this reducing is that the reality shows that there is a decrease of the demand. So it's a market reality.
But I'm a consumer, just don't disclose that, but you know, I'm living in the middle of nowhere,
yes.
And then you will have players, if we don't designate one, you believe that the market will play, that I will get all my parcels? I should say a lot of yes, hopefully. Then
I know that at least in Romania, let's say, there are at least 3-4 players who can deliver to you, maybe not next day in a rural area, but in the second or third day, let's say maximum, at the same price as because of the aggregation of orders. So it is not so expensive to deliver in a rural areas if you're not delivering every day.
Okay, then you're confident. Not every year, hopefully.
No.
Okay, especially for the fresh foods. Then let's have a view with Mr. Van der Horst from UPS. Then, yes, you can stay there. No, you know, we discuss about different views here. We have to designate yes, no. Do we have to designate USO providers?
Yeah, well, thank you very much for offering me the floor. First of all, I'd like to thank the organizers, ERGP, and also the host, ANCOM, for the excellent hospitality and event. And I think it's very appropriate to start with a debate about the scope of the USO at this time. I need to make a big disclaimer, of course. United Parcel Service is not a universal service provider. We are a non-universal service provider. I just want to make sure that's clear to everybody. And I think one of the advantages of speaking at the end of a conference, or one of the disadvantages, is that most of the things have already been said, which also is the advantage of being at the end of a conference, is that you can sort of summarize a few things and then come to the questions that you would like me to answer. And before I answer those questions, within the time given, I think it is, I think one of the comments that I liked most was the fact that we talk about an historical perspective of this process, going back to even 1989 at a certain point, I think, by Bruno, and some of us might remember Antibes and the SOGP papers and other documents that appeared at the time. Hopefully not everybody. I think it is important to realize that the debate today, in my view, should be very different than just continuing the discussions that started in 1992 with the Green Paper. So I liked Werner's comments very much about thinking about this in a bit more of a tabula rasa approach. This is not about creating a regulatory framework to deal with ensuring the provision of letter mail services in a market that we want to liberalize. This is about thinking about how we can move forward in a market that has changing needs and question rightfully whether or not you need to have designated operators, what sort of scope of universal service you need to have, how you can keep and make that affordable. I think one important thing that I picked up also from the previous session, I think we should not confuse what is needed with what needs to be regulated. It's not because we identify a lot of user needs that all these needs require regulation. I would even go to the contrary. I think it is true, and we should recognize in this effort that a lot of the needs that are today in the market, certainly when it comes to parcel delivery, are fully addressed and fully provided for by multiple operators, whether it's traditional posts, private sector operators, whoever. And it is up to the market to provide those services, to fulfill those needs, and only if those needs are not met by normal market mechanisms, to start considering some sort of regulatory intervention. I think that's a principle that we should maybe seriously take into account moving forward with this discussion. And then, of course, you go to the whole debate of, well, what are these needs and how do they fit with the current definition of how the universal service is defined for documents and parcels, and can you reduce certain things? I think there's definitely room to do that, whether you do that by reducing the frequency, whether you do that by focusing on consumer to X deliveries only, and if you focus on small parcels and letters only instead of parcels up to 20 kilos. And I think those discussions need to be had. But I think there's another element that we also should take into account. That is that, again, going back to the 1992 Green Paper and the whole 3 directives that came out of it, something has also, I think, fundamentally changed when it comes to what I would call the other forms of regulations that exist today that protect consumers. We have a consumer right directive. We have a lot of other rules and regulations in the market that actually protect consumers. So the question should also be, why have postal sector specific regulation dealing, for instance, with essential requirements, if many of these concerns are being addressed through other forms of regulation? So again, that is also something to take into account moving forward in this discussion about regulating the sector. If you then come to, let's say, the questions you put in the second part of the questionnaire, well, does this current scope of the USO lead to excessive cost? I wouldn't know. I haven't seen the accounts. I don't know what is excessive. The Frontier study clearly indicated that there's no common calculation methodology, so we have to rely on regulators. But making the jump to the compensation fund discussion, I think we very easily sort of start discussing a compensation fund and whether or not it would work. My answer is no, it doesn't, so get rid of it. But what you first need to demonstrate that there is indeed a cost. So let's first make sure we have some sort of mechanism in place to actually define whether or not there is a cost burden. Do you need to designate operators? I think there's one big market called Germany where there's clearly not a universal service provider, capital USP, and where the market works pretty well. So do you have to have a designated operator? No. Should there be a mechanism to at least identify market failure and then, for instance, through a mechanism of tender, fill the gap that exists in the market? Yes, that is something you should think about if you want to move to a new form of regulation. Could tariff regulation, affordable prices, VAT exemptions introduce a competitive distortion in postal markets? Well, I would hope that tariff regulation would avoid competitive distortion. I do think that the VAT exemption for consumer-to-consumer business is still a bit of a handicap for private operators to compete on an equal footing with the exempted operators. But I hope, again, that tariff regulation would help to avoid competitive distortion. So that's my simple answer on that particular question. Were there any other questions I missed? Yeah, again, the compensation fund. Again, first and foremost, I think it is an artificial discussion to talk about, should we have one, yes or no? Now, first you need to establish if there is indeed a cost burden. But I think we need to get beyond this compensation fund discussion. There's not one single market in the EU where today a compensation fund is working. I think it is simply saying ridiculous to expect other operators to pay for the inefficiencies of the incumbent to cover some sort of cost that derives from the obligation, even without being anyway engaged with using the infrastructure offered by the incumbent. So let's look at other mechanisms, and why not simply increase the price of the service to the level where it could cover the cost based on a fair calculation method. So those are my views. Thank you.
Very much. Then feel free to show your hand if you would like to raise a question. I would like to invite Mr. Dolszewski. I hope that Mr. Dolszewski from Polska Post Office, is it there? No? No? Then maybe I'm sorry, Mr. Christian, to come back to you on mechanism. Can you just in 2 words say what's the situation in Austria regarding the USO, and What are how do you see, on a prospective point of view, how do you see the evolution?
Yes, and as we see it, I mean, Austrian Post is the designated universal service provider in Austria, and the National Regulations Authority, or better to say, the Austrian Parliament, broadly followed the framework that the European Union has set with the Postal Directive, with the last Postal Directive. So, universal service obligation in Austria is like, yeah, mostly that what the Postal Directive has given us as a framework. But with some specificities coming to rural areas, for example, delivery to households and to the premises of the private persons, there is few possibility to, you know, use common post boxes in rural areas, which in some other in some other member states, I heard, is quite common.
Okay, and if we have to look in the future, what will be your best guess in terms of financing the USO, if of course we have financing issues? How do you see that?
Yeah, I mean, there is the idea of a compensation fund in Austria, but it's not funded by anyone, but of the universal service provider as the incumbent with the market share. But I think the future of the universal service costs can only be to make the core business as profitable as it can get, so that universal service is financed by the company itself. Mm-hmm. But that's my opinion on that.
Okay, and I don't know if we have Mr. or Mrs. Wesset from Norway. Yes? Hello?
Yes.
Yes,
I'm
then
here.
you have a country which might be different in terms of geography and so on. In just 2 words, what's the situation in your country? And if we look to some specificities, is that how is it going further in the future? And do we have to designate further or confirmed USP provider? And if yes, how?
Well, these were many questions, but first of all, Norway is very long country, broad, with many fjords and mountains. So it's quite it's less populated. So it's quite costly to do delivery service. At present, we have I'm from the universal service provider, Postal Norge, and we have an obligation to deliver 6 days a week, all over the country, to every household. That obligation is now on the way to be relaxed. It's a consultation proposal from the government at present to reduce it down to 5 days a week. And this meets some political opposition, of course. But then we'll be down to the minimum according to the Postal Directive. At present, we have a compensation fund which is financed by state budget, that is through general taxes. In my opinion, that is the most efficient way. It's a service of general economic interest, and that means it should be financed by general taxes. In the proposal, now on consultation from the government, there are one option is to designate a universal service provider, but this, or it could be served by the market without specific designation, but that is probably a more unrealistic scenario in Norway due to the high costs of delivery. So there will probably be some sort of a need of external funding. Another option could be a tender in specific areas or for specific services. That's an option considered in the consultation too. When it comes to the scope of the USO, looking forward, We see a need for more flexibility, even when it comes to delivery frequency. If we look back to year 2000 until now, the volumes of the letter mail volumes in Norway has diminished by almost 50%, which says very much about about changing needs of consumers as well as of businesses. And we are looking into the future as well. Let's say till 2020 will be another reduction of 50% probably. So the question is how to keep a sustainable USO with changing consumer needs, and these consumer needs should and business needs should of course be taken into account when defining the USO, and these needs are definitely changing. If the USO doesn't take this into account, it will be very costly, and the need for compensation will increase substantially. So that was more the forward-looking perspective. And in Norway, I believe we will have to, there must be a designated operator.
Okay.
Most probably. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
That basically that raw mail itself should be sustainable. But what we would have to look at are things like compensation funds and pay or play. If we carry on with the current situation, which is that we have competition in the profitable areas that's developing and it's growing, and that we're being, through the USO, having to provide for the unprofitable areas and the rural areas in particular. So going forward, we will need to see how the USO continues to be paid for.
Thank you. Then, Mr. Balasel? I don't know if Mr. Balasel is there. No? I would like maybe to come back on alternative. Oh, Mr. Balasel, yes. No, you want to raise a question? Yes, please.
I would just to intervene. My name is Andrea Grillo, Poste Italiane. Let me say something about also the Italian market, because I think that this is a situation that could be very similar also for other countries. In the Italian market, we have very low postal volumes because we have a difficult situation on the market. There is a strong substitution by the digital communication service, and the low volume is 73 items per capita. This is one of the lowest in Europe. We have a very high substitution, and we are also very difficult orography situation, of course, and the level of the volumes is also one of the main factors for a very high fixed cost delivery, the cost for delivery network. So we think that the situation could be an example also for a revision of the current European rules, because we think that in this context, maintaining a level of the universal service, such as the 5 days delivery frequency, 5 days per week, would put at risk in the future the financial sustainability of the universal service. Let me say also that, of course, we must take into account the consumer view. There is a very recent survey in Italy about the consumers, and the results are the 75% of the consumers, of the Italian consumers, would be favorable to a delivery frequency that is lower than 5 days a week, because the digital substitution had a very strong effect. So we think that one of the main options for the future could be a universal service that take into account a strong reduction of the current levels of delivery frequency. In this way, I mean, I refer to the big study of 2013, and one of the options of the study, they referred about ubiquity and affordability for universal service, just demanding to the specific situation of the member states about the delivery frequency and obligation. So I agree with this way of proceeding. Also, I remember this morning also Copenhagen Economics, also the ministry in Netherlands, they say something about the need of revision of these 5 days a week that could be something of that put at risk the sustainability of the universal service provider.
Thank you. Then we are closing slowly the discussion. If you have questions, please show your hand. Mr. Clara Bianca, just a quick question then. We discussed about financing, designation, and so on. You came earlier today with the discussion about sharing infrastructure and so on and so on. If we look quickly, then do we need to designate a party, or do we have to think on another way? Means try to create the right environment for synergies between players, essentially in difficult to reach areas. Do we need to designate, and how we will finance that?
We consider that in Romania there is no need to designate just one universal service provider. Because all the other alternative postal providers already cover the rural areas, all the villages. The problem could be that the price is now a bit higher than the ones provided by the universal service provider designated. Because the universal service provider designated has a VAT exemption, and in our country, the VAT is a bit high, 24%. So we cannot compete with that price now. But if it would be a free market with no designated universal service provider, I think maybe the costs would be lower, because everybody could deliver in the countryside, and the prices could be fixed by competition, not by state rules. And
then you see effectively some effect on competition with those VAT rules or other ones.
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. It's not a conclusion, but I would like to invite our friends from UPU, because when we talk about universal service obligations, one of the things we discussed today is, of course, the scope. What will be the minimum set? We might look to have difference in terms of USO, different ways to designate, yes or no. Still a large number of questions. But, of course, in Europe, we are not alone. And it's important also to know what's going on in other countries. Like, one of the things which was quite clear for me when we look to Kenya, for example, if you had already the opportunity to go to Kenya, they have regions which might be as big as Belgium, or at least big as a country for us, and they will say, we have one post office. And then, you know, we are questioning then, means that they are, you know, different things. How can they live with that? That means that we have also, of course, looking to what's going on in terms of USO. Look, what will be the, maybe not the right word, interoperability between countries, continents, areas, and so on. That's something also we have to look for. Mr. Buchanan, what's going on at UPU?
Well, hello. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Jacques. You can hear me now? Good. I'm Murray Buchanan, the Director of Economic and Regulatory Affairs at the UPU, and today's been a very interesting discussion for us to listen to, and we thank you for asking for our contribution. It's one thing to talk about domestic issues with regard to universal service and with regard to the post. It's quite another thing to talk about European issues and the regional market or the single market, but today I'd like to try and give a little hint of perhaps the global perspective as it affects the USO throughout the world. And of course, as we all know, Europe trades and trades increasingly with the rest of the world. So if I can beg your leave, I'd like to give just some background on the UPU to put this into context, because although I see many faces I know here today, there are quite a few of you, I think, that probably have never visited us in Bern and been to any of the sessions. So with regard to the mission of the UPU, the vision that we see here is that the postal sector is seen as an essential component of the global economy. We're familiar with that, and that's especially in terms of trade facilitation and ensuring that the postal items have free trade throughout the world. The direction of the UPU is that we're trying to deliver innovative, inclusive, integrated solutions. The key word there for us today, I think, being integrated. And our focus is trying to provide value-added, tailored products and services that deliver a solid return on investment for those who are using them. Now, the UPU is not a regulator in the sense of regulating the market or regulating incumbent posts, but the UPU does provide a single treaty and a single set of acts that govern all international postal exchanges, and I say all international postal exchanges, for example, in terms of standards, quality of service, remuneration, etc. And the reason I specified all is that includes the plethora of multilateral and bilateral agreements between posts in a European context. These agreements are subsets of the UPU treaty, and the key message from this, I think, is that this is an international treaty with the force of international law, and posts should not feel that they can cherry-pick the treaty. In terms of the mission of the UPU, I read it here, but highlight the areas in red where we are tasked to guarantee the free circulation of postal items over a single postal territory, to encourage the adoption of fair, common standards and the use of technology, and to ensure the satisfaction of customers' changing needs. And we've talked quite a lot about those today. Our keystone is the Doha Postal Strategy. I'm not going to go into it in any detail. Those of you who know it will be relieved to hear. But just to pull out 4 words that pertain to each of the 4 goals of the Doha Postal Strategy. The first one being interoperability, and that means interoperability across a global stage, not a European or domestic one. 2, to provide technical knowledge and expertise. 3, to provide innovative products and services. And 4, to foster sustainable development of the postal sector. And working in a global environment, we also interact with some global partners. And you see here some of them. With customs, we're heavily involved with the WCO. With airlines, especially recently on security aspects with IATA and ICAO, but also standards worldwide with the World Trade Organization, financial inclusion, development, and of course the European Commission, who is an observer at the UPU. So just coming to the obligations, and we talked about designation from a domestic point of view, but from an international point of view, it's very clear. Article 2 of the UPU Convention states designation that governments must designate an operator or operators to fulfill the obligations that arise from the acts. That's part of the treaty at the highest level in the convention. And then being a little more specific, Article 13 of the convention says that governments must ensure the provision of these services, so letterpost items up to 2 kilos, letters, postcard, printed papers, packets, special bags, M-bags with newspapers, periodicals, etc., up to 30 kilograms, and parcels up to 20 kilograms. And if you permit me here, just some observation. The innovations and the downsizing initiatives, if I can put it that way, of the universal service obligation are largely confined to industrialized countries. So we talk today about Europe, and in the paper it mentions the USA, New Zealand, Canada, Australia, but not developing countries. In many developing countries, the letters market is still growing, especially in Asian countries. And the innovations tend to pertain to parcels and packets. I think we've talked about that today, and the downsizing or more flexibility, if you want to put it that way, to letters. And again, simply an observation, it seems that this is driven mainly, on the one hand, through the opportunities provided by the likes of e-commerce, driving innovation and designated operators providing more and more services, and on the other side, the cost imperatives of the letter market causing designated operators to seek to flex the USO to cope with that, but very much driven by the designated operators. Now, the UPU, I think, today would just like to remind everyone that no matter what happens with regard to the universal service, that the ERPG and anyone else who's dealing with this issue remembers the global context of the treaty and the acts when doing that re-examination. Now, just to wind up, I'm not suggesting these areas should be included in the universal service, but I think they are evolving areas. Some of them have been mentioned today, others haven't been mentioned today. Digital and mobile, we know that mobile will overtake digital in the next few years. It's going to grow by a factor of 4. How does that fit with the consumer's perception of the USO? What about financial issues, financial inclusion, the ability to pay, because that's key if we're moving into a market where we're distributing goods rather than simply messages. E-commerce is the hot topic of the moment. At the UPU, those of you who think that the UPU is slow-moving, the UPU has specified, agreed, and passed regulations to facilitate an e-commerce product in 6 months, and the first parcels will start to flow through these products in early 2015, and we all have to move quickly in order to accommodate this great opportunity. And of course, we have, to a greater or lesser extent, talked about our customers, but our customers being the end customer, the paying customer, or the citizens. I suggest it has to be them all. And now, because Jack was generous, he gave me a 6th minute, because you can't cover the world in 5 minutes. I'm going to end with a very short advert. Those of you who haven't played a part in the UPU, we do have a regulatory forum. It took place last week. It was very successful. Jack was one of our key speakers. We'd really like to try and reach out to regulators across the globe and to people interested in regulatory affairs, whether they be from governments or designated operators, to come and take part in these global debates at the UPU. There's going to be a study in the early half of next year regarding how to develop this platform for regulatory issues at the UPU. So our doors are open to you all, and we'd love to come and see you in Bern and continue this type of debate. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, it has been a real pleasure to have you today, and I'm happy to present you and introduce you my colleagues who will present you shortly a non-exhaustive bottom-up presentation about what we collected until now. Just for the sake of clarity, what you will see on screen is based on inputs we already got on written, because remember that we got already written contributions, and also from what we got and what we heard today. One of the key things, and not going into much details, is that we are very happy that we got more than 30 written contributions. And we had more than 180 participants. One of the things is, and probably something I will have to tell my grandmother, is that what will be the future of the USO, and especially for my little son. then remember that we try to cover at least 4 areas. The first of it was definitely the definition. What will be the US definition tomorrow? And I think that it was already an exciting discussion. The second one, we have been a bit shy. On a personal point of view, I will say, I'm keen to know more about, depending the discussion and the burden on operators, what will be the preferred, best, optimal, efficient, effective USP designation process we might follow. The third question we raised was about financing mechanism. I was so happy to hear different views from alternative players, from, let's say, traditional players, from users, consumers. And then we have to understand, if we have to go to a designation, what will be the optimal financing mechanism. And last but not least, of course, was the fourth dimension, thinking about competition. Then let me introduce you Lars, who will present you the first one. And once again, it's non-exhaustive, and it's based on both inputs. Thank you. Lars.
Many thanks to all the stakeholders being present here today, and thanks to Jack for giving me the floor. I think it's too bad that we do not have a European standard for the reportation of the result of a workshop, because this is a true challenge. However, as Jack said, we have tried to make a summary of what we have heard today, interesting views, and also we are also making use of the contributions during the public consultation. So to start with the universal service definition, I think there is quite a general view that the universal service obligation needs to be interpreted and implemented in a dynamical way, and the object should be to provide a sustainable universal service obligation in each member state, and specifically tailored to be responsive and proportionate with the needs of its users. So I think many have underlined this essential thing. And it's also the one size does not fit all, and we need flexibility on the national level in all, maybe, respects, and full, maybe, account taken to national differences, because here we have not a common view among the stakeholders today. As mentioned by some stakeholders here, the universal service should provide for national coverage in mail services, but how often and how often must be up to the respective member states to decide. But it's essentially not to undermine cross-border, and how this could be done, we have to consider in the future. Talking about this flexibility, some stakeholders say that it's already provided for flexibility in directive, but some stakeholders say that we need even more flexibility. So that is something we have to discuss in the future. And the stakeholders have also underlined that we need a clear definition of universal services and the quality of services required. I think this is essentially with regard to the commercial interests and safeguarding competition, so that universal service providers should not, in one deal, they could refer to this as a universal service obligation services in another business or another affair with other contractors. They could say that, no, this is outside the scope of universal services. So we have other requirements, and we have other prices. There is also a opinion that regulators need to obtain a clear understanding of the core needs of the users, and regardless of technological advancements and internet penetration, and the universal service obligation should remain responding to the needs of the customers. And I would say that after having read the answers to the public consultation, I think that some stakeholders, they believe that already the changing consumers' patterns give evidence to what the universal service should look like today. For instance, a decline or eliminating 5-day delivery up to 3-day delivery. But some others are very cautious that if changes are to be taken place, we need to make in-depth analysis of what the needs are of the consumers or the users. And another essential point raised is what users' needs are is not what needs to be regulated. And regulation should only apply where there is a market failure, where the services couldn't be provided on a commercial basis, probably. Furthermore, a number of elements to be considered has been mentioned in the process. Minimum delivery of intra-community mail. Also, we have heard that some suggest that we will have a maximum of delivery, quite the contrary then, and should registered postal items be included and guarantee one postal point per municipality, and protection of users who are blind, disabled, elderly, and specific needs of consumers or users in rural areas. It's also the issue of price regulation. And so according to what we heard from the ministry in the Netherlands, price is the #1 priority of the users. And that could always be, of course, be challenged, but it's an interesting point of view. Talking about maximum and minimum scope and standards, we've heard from the European Commission at least mention the need for both a maximum and a minimum level. So a minimum and a level that should not be exceeded in the member countries. Generally, I would say that targeted, we've also heard that balancing that there's a need to balance the adaptation to changing needs, and at the same time not undermining the essence of the universal service providers. And it's essentially pointed out the workers and the end user rights in this context. Targeted user groups, generally, I think it's generally accepted that individuals and small and medium-sized enterprises should be covered by this. It's also mentioned that vulnerable user groups, such as users in rural areas and disabled and elderly people, should be targeted. But what other groups, if any, that's not clear at the moment. But we will have to examine the answers in depth to see if we find these other groups. On the other hand, we have heard that we are not going to talk about targeted users group, or we'd rather being a part of the communication branch and meeting the needs of the users, not generally speaking about targeted groups. So to me, it appears to be the society as a whole. To say a few words that could summarize this, I think most stakeholders are aware that we have to reduce or at least consider the scope of universal service obligation as presented by Copenhagen Economics. And I think generally, a general point of view is that we have to provide for more flexibility, or we need at least flexibility in the system to adapt to users' needs. And probably also with respect to changing communication patterns in the future, because it's a dynamic process that goes on. And also, most stakeholders points out the considerations to consider the needs of specific user group and I mentioned them before, elderly people, disabled people, and people in rural areas, essentially. So that's so far the conclusions or a brief presentation of what we have heard today. And as Jack underlined, this is not actually the standpoint of the ERGP. It's rather the presentation of what we have heard today. And we have tried to also find some issues here that represent different interests and different opinions in this context. Thank you.
Thank you, Lars. Then I would like to invite Camilla to present the 3 other pillars of the discussion of today. Thank you.
Okay, so I will go through the USP designation mechanism and the financing mechanism and competition. As for the designation mechanism, we heard very interesting inputs. We heard many people asking for a public auction tender procedure to select the USPs. And in some written contribution, there was also a very provocative issue by saying that if alternative providers are not given the chance to express their interest to provide universal service obligation, then they shouldn't be asked to contribute at any cost of the universal service obligation. The tender procedure can be tailored for single services by meaning unbundling the services, or tailored in a geographical segmentation also. But still very interesting and provocative based on practical experience. Are we sure that there will be operators interested in offering postal services and so participating at the tender? And based on the Germany experience, are we sure that we have to designate one or more USPs? So this is something that needs to be addressed very carefully. As for the financing mechanism, many of the stakeholders consider that the compensation fund doesn't work. And that means that the USPs must be able to cover the universal service net cost with its own resources. In this case, I mean, deregulation can be of a help because of the pricing regulation, getting to the cost, and also for, and in the case of compensation fund, we should be, in some opinion, just not the rule, but the exception. Then there must be clear who is going to participate, who is going to be the beneficiaries, and how to participate. But then again, based on practical experience, who is going to really paying for the compensation fund? Operators or only the USP due to its market share? So this is, again, very interesting issue. On the other hand, to reduce costs, one input could be to reduce the universal service obligation scope, and also to verify the net cost of universal service only in those areas where there is no competition in delivery, and also by unbundling the universal postal services costs. On the last issue about competition, in some contribution we see that there is a claim to maintain the current minimum universal service obligation scope irrespective of the competition, so of the market development. And on the VAT exemption, there is quite a large consensus in saying that this kind of exemption is a competitive distortion, especially when applied to services that are offered in competition with other service providers. Some solutions proposed are to apply the VAT exemption to all operators, or to just for targeted and disadvantaged groups, so meaning just for few services targeted for those kind of groups. Again, also in this case, pricing and access regulation could help to avoid market distortion by keeping prices closely geared to costs, but still there is a need for more consistency across member states, both in methodology and calculation. So thank you very much for all your inputs, and I leave the floor to Jack for the conclusion, or to you?
Then, thank you very much. I would like to give the floor back to Mr. Cătălin Marinescu, ERGP Chair for 2014. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, I may tell you that I'm very happy with the outcomes of this workshop. And this is because of your contribution, because of the participants, because of the speakers, and because most of you are responding very fast and very accurate to the question Jack asked to you this afternoon. And I would like to thank you, all of you, for this exercise, which is very, very useful for ERGP, for European Commission, and I'm sure that we will continue and we will repeat this kind of exercise in the future on the different topics. And I would like to thank you, all of you. A special thanks to our facilitator, to our moderator, to Jack Hammond, who was really the star of this workshop. And thank you very much. And at the same time, a special thanks to Lars and Camilla, who will continue the work. And the work is not easy because we got your opinions, but they are very divergent. And we try to accommodate all the opinions and to give our opinion to the European Commission, which will not be very easy. Thank you again. All the conclusions will go to you via mail, to all the participants, be sure on that. And be sure that you will be part of our consultation next year as well, when the report, a preliminary report, will have probably in the mid of next year, and the report, the final report, we hope that we will approve at the end of the next year. Thank you again, and safe trip home, and good luck, and keep in touch with the ERGP, which is very open to discuss with all the stakeholders. Thank you very much.